Welcome to Cosmic Comics, Games and Collectibles, your zen of geekism. We carry comics old and new, magazines, toys, games like Pokemon, Magic, D&D. Want Godzilla, Ultraman, Star Trek, Ninja Turtles, Funko Pops? You'll find it all here. Shop our Cosmic Sound Room and pick up a record or two. Enjoy our Comic Coffee Lounge with a cup of Sasquatch coffee while geeking out over a super cool movie on our big screen. Cosmic Comic, Games and Collectibles. Superman loves us, and so will you.
Hi everyone, Jason Hunt here, inviting you to join us every Saturday morning for news, the week's headlines in science fiction, fantasy, horror, comic books, video games, plus Comic-Con updates and the weather, and the occasional interview along the way. We call it Good Morning Multiverse. We hope you join us every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, right here on Sci-Fi for Me TV.
The Madness Entertainment Group presents the Madness Comic Network with original programming and additional comic-related content. Tune in and subscribe to Comic Talk with Pops Van Zandt on YouTube.
And good afternoon, everybody. I am RJ Carter, Senior Managing Editor here at CriticalBlast.com, Chief Envelope Licker for Critical Blast Logistics, my office proofreader for Critical Blast Publishing, and I will answer the phones for Critical Blast Consultings if you have a data issue with your crowdfunder. Wow, I did that all in one take.
Wow.
No, this is recorded.
Could you repeat it? I couldn't hear it.
This is a special afternoon edition because I've talked with Bob a couple of different times. I've talked with Glenn a couple of different times, and you both are biographers of Marvel giants. I'm a DC guy, and even I can respect the work that was done by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and the impact it had on pop culture. Iron sharpens iron, so they just made DC better by putting out great product at Marvel. So I wanted to thought it would be cool to have you guys come together and just talk about how these guys worked together as a team, bringing your various knowledges together. For folks in the chat who think this is going to be a slobber knocker, to borrow from Jack, between who was better, it's not. You guys can have that fight in Twitter all you want, but this is
exactly
going to be more of a hey, we know these guys, and here's what they did, and here's how they came together. And we'll start with Bob on the right here, and ask you again. I know I asked you this before, but why Stan Lee, and why does he mean so much to you that you've written not one, but I believe 3 biographies now?
Yeah, and I think what's cool about this, and I appreciate it, RJ, so much, is that Glenn and I both, lots of biographers never meet their subjects. I wrote a biography of John Updike and Bob Dylan, never met either one of them, sadly. Hopefully, maybe someday. I'd be a little intimidated meeting Bob Dylan, but
it wouldn't be.
Glenn and I both got the chance to meet the men that we write about. And so I think that's an added interesting perspective. My interest in Stan Lee goes back to my own childhood. The story that I tell that's 100% true is I taught myself to read so that I could read Spider-Man comics. And I think it's, I'm a writer first person. I'm a writer, I'm a historian. And so the word is what attracts me. And when I was in Western Pennsylvania as a kid growing up in the 70s, and I saw the Stan Lee Presents, to me, none of the other words on the page matter, just what the heroes were saying. So I was always attracted to the voice and the style of Marvel. And that led me into Stan Lee. And I think there are lots of people who love Stan. There are lots of people who hate him. There are lots of people who have mixed feelings. But it's difficult to argue that he is one of the creative icons of contemporary America. Few people have had as much impact. And that's for a number of reasons. But I would say that those are the primary reasons I got involved in Stan Lee. I wanted to tackle a topic, a person that I cared about, that I thought had a big, oversized size.
Oh, you muted yourself, Bob. Your mute button came on.
Oh, sorry about that. I don't know
how that happened. I didn't touch it.
Yeah, but just I don't know what I touched, but I touched something, but I won't do that again. So just wanted to tackle an oversized character that had a big impact on cultural history.
And Glenn, you're kind of in the same position here. You admired and respected Jack Kirby. What was the birth of that?
The birth of that was way back in 1965 when one of my elder brothers brought home Strange Tales 136, which was scripted by Lee, and the layouts were done by Jack Kirby, and John Severin drew over those layouts, or at least used those layouts to, for his sequential. It was only, I think, I know this isn't going to be an argument about who was what and whatever, but it has to be said that as good a dialogue writer as Stan Lee was, and he was, and I love those comics and still do, love those words, he didn't have anything until the artist brought it in. He might have said, have them meet God, but the artist brought the stuff in.
That was the
Stan Lee was a good
writing,
salesman.
right? I mean, it was, you follow a basic plot and then the dialogue would be added to it later.
Well, it depends what you call a plot, doesn't it? I mean, this was Steve Ditko's problem, wasn't it? As the credits say in the Spider-Man comics, are plotted by Steve Ditko. Now, as far as I understand it, I know we're talking about Kirby and Lee, but I'm using Ditko as the example because, as far as I understand it, Ditko didn't actually speak to Stan Lee for 2 years. Never, not a phone call, not a letter. Didn't speak to him. So how could Stan Lee be telling him what to do? And
I did not know that. I knew he was a very much a reclusive person, but
well, no, it wasn't because he was a recluse. It was because they fell out.
Oh well,
because he felt that Stan Lee was taking all the credit because they all said written by Stan Lee, and it depends on your your definition of writing, doesn't it? If you write a book, and I've written a few books. I wrote those books. Those are my words, and that's me writing it. But if you write a comic in the Marvel method, the artist does most of the work. Stan Lee might say, "Have them fight Doctor Doom this issue," but the artist plots it and does all the sequential, and then Stan Lee puts the dialogue on top. And I'm not saying the dialogue isn't good, and I'm not saying that Stan Lee wasn't brilliant, because he was. But I don't think he wrote those comics wrote in inverted commas those comics.
Is that why we slice up the duties then in comics? Because with a book or a magazine or anything else, it's even with a movie, it's written by, directed by, but with comics, you get the writer, you get the plotter, you get different credits for layouts, for pencils, for inks. Sometimes it's just art.
The the inker or the embellisher depends what you're looking at. If you're looking at, I would say that somebody like Frank Giacoya, who was a fantastic artist and did a lot of inking on Kirby, I'd say he was an inker, but I would say that Joe Sinnott was an embellisher because Kirby told Mike Royer later, when he was doing the New Gods in the 70s, he told Mike Royer not to change anything, just go over the lines. And that's what Mike Roy did. And Mike Roy is a very, very good inker. But Joe Sinnott would change things. He would make Sue look prettier, Reed look more handsome. So he embellished it. So there's even a difference there. And if you look at those Fantastic Fours, I'm sure it must say inked by Joe Sinnott somewhere, but it also says embellished a lot. And he brings a lot more to it. Not that the others couldn't, but that wasn't their directive at the time.
I do recall seeing embellished as one of the credits in there, but it's like you had to come up with a title for something. If you did something on the book, then you got to get a check for that.
Exactly, and that was Ditko's problem, because in his mind he was plotting all those stories, and Stan Lee was getting all the money and the credit.
Yeah, well, Bob, this falls back into your area here. Now, one of the things that
see, we say we don't want to get into the fine granule, and then immediately we go right to the fine granule.
I know, it's my fault.
It's fine. It's so I would say, if you look at the way movies are produced, there's usually, well, at least there used to be a writer, but that writer never wrote that script, and it's not even a guarantee that the actor didn't rewrite the script, that the director didn't rewrite the script, or the actor changed the lines on the fly and they took the best take. And so what I think about this is that there were lots of fingers all over the comic books. To me, the dialogue is the voice of the character. And Stan Lee, one of the ways people want to diminish it is just say he just filled in word bubbles. Well, those word bubbles become the voice of the character. And I think so much of it is built on later interviews and things people said later, because it's the magazine part of Marvel and the way you produce comic books back then. Spider-Man, for example, they had no idea it was going to be a hit. It became a hit. They'd already moved on. They couldn't just punch it up on the internet to go back and look at Spider-Man between the time of 15 and then launching the series by itself. So what builds up is decades and decades and decades of stories that get changed. And so much when we're looking at Kirby and Lee is trying to suss through the stories. Fact, I mean, I don't even know fact went out the window 5 minutes after Kirby turned in a set of drawings and Stan scripted the episode. So there's a lot of interesting ways to parse this up. Usually, to me, it's the words. When I watch a movie, it's the words that are said. Yeah. That's the way I kind of look at comic books.
And it's like one person. Again, comics have always been collaborative. One person's writing the sequence of events, which you don't read, but you do experience and see. And the other person's writing the dialogue, which is what you're reading and what you're hearing. It's what's telling you the story, literally telling you the story when you're doing that.
The words to me are the scenery. If you've got a comic book,
spoken like a true artist.
No, but listen,
yeah, exactly.
Listen, no, give me a chance.
Sure.
If you take a comic, any comic book, you take any film, if you take away the words, you should still see what's going on. The words of the scenery, the name of the guy. You don't need to know that the guy who stretches is called Reed Richards. He could be called Bob Smith, Phil Jones. It doesn't matter. But if he doesn't stretch in the comic, he's not Mr. Fantastic, is he? You see what I mean? So if you've got a film like, say, Close Encounters, and you take away all the dialogue and watch that film with the sound off, you can still see what happens. The fact that the guy's called, is it Neary, is irrelevant. It's scenery. You don't need to know what he's called, but you need to see what he does. And that's what comics do. And that's what Jack Kirby says when he says he wrote them. He would turn in 20 pages of sequential art, and you've seen the art. If you look at the art, the original artwork, you'll see that he puts notes down the side for Stan to follow. And also, if you look at that artwork, you'll see that Stan Lee doesn't follow those notes. So if Stan Lee told Jack Kirby to draw that story like that, and Jack Kirby didn't turn it in like that, surely he'd have something to say. He didn't know what Kirby was going to bring, and he says that himself in interviews. He didn't. Silver Surfer. Yeah. He didn't know. He doesn't have. He didn't create anything to do with the Surfer, because when he got the boards, and I think it's in either one of your books or certainly a book I've read, he didn't know who he was. He didn't know what it was. He knew that Galactus was going to be coming, but he didn't know that the Surfer was going to be coming. So who wrote that? Kirby wrote
and I think this is why I was looking forward to this, Glenn, because you and I look at comic books completely in opposite ways, and probably look at movies in the same way. Because if we take your Close Encounter example, I would say, whether or not you've seen the movie, if you go E.T. phone home, everybody in the world knows that. And that's a line that somebody wrote. And to me, the value of the movie is not, like, when I look at a comic book, believe it or not, I could care less about I'm creating it in my mind. What I'm seeing in the panel it's a guide. And so to me, the words are what attracted me as a reader.
Well, spoken like a writer.
Yeah, exactly. And so I like the back and forth, because you're looking at it as an artist.
You should read books and leave comics alone.
Oh no, because each side brings its own iconic. Okay, so like I'm
only pulling his leg.
I can totally follow a Stephen Bissett and John Totleben Swamp Thing story and just love the art.
Yeah.
But when you have lines like, "But will there be blood? Oh yes, blood in great quantities." That's an iconic line. You can watch Close Encounters with the volume off and follow the story. I can watch Close Encounters with my back turned to it and hear do do do.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that words aren't important in things. I'm not saying that at all. I'm a writer too, It's not. I'm not saying that. We're talking about comics, aren't we? We're talking about Kirby, what Kirby book. But if you want to watch, if you want to prove what happened, if that's possible, which obviously it's not, but let's just go with it. If you look at the timeline, 1941 to 1971. Stan Lee's there for about 4 years. Kirby's doing Captain America. That was pretty good. That was pretty big. Stan Lee had nothing to do with that. Was Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, and whoever created it is a debate for that story. But Stan Lee was nowhere near it. So Kirby was pretty good. And don't forget, Kirby was 23 years old when he and Joe Simon created Captain America.
Oh
right?
Yeah.
And then Stan Lee
until issue 11, when Stan Lee took over Captain America, and it just kept right on rolling. So,
and why was that?
It's interesting.
Why did he take over Captain America?
Because Martin Goodman is a horrible person and didn't pay them royalties.
Yeah, and then what happened? Kirby ended up in Europe fighting Germans. So he couldn't have done anything about it anyway.
Well, they were. This all happened pre-war. So this is 41.
Right.
Kirby doesn't go into the military until much later than. I mean, we're not in the war in 41.
43. Yeah.
So Joe and Jack say, "Hey, Martin Goodman, you're not giving us our royalties. We're outselling Superman with Captain America." Yeah. So they start moonlighting for DC, and everything's common knowledge in the comic book business back then. And so they found out it could have been the DC guys that told Martin Goodman. And the Solomon brothers then outgo Kirby and Simon, and Stan's the only one left. So he becomes editor, and that's how that rolls out. So
okay, then let's shift it 30 years. What did he do after Kirby left?
Oh, well, he created Spider-Man when he was like
No,
48
no,
years
no,
old,
after,
49.
no, I don't mean that.
Kirby was back then.
30 years later, 1970, 71, what did Lee do after Kirby left?
He wrote a lot of romance books. In fact, that was what I wanted to bring up with Justin's comment here. The reason he loves Stan is those inner monologues. The thing about Stan is he was a romance comic writer thrust onto superhero genre. So he was still writing romance. You have.
And who created the romance line of comics?
Yeah, Kirby and Simon created it.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
I mean, the interesting thing to me, if we make it, not contentious, because I love Jack Kirby.
I think he's brilliant.
absolutely believe in this collaboration that sparked brilliance, both him and Ditko. I think Ditko was probably we wouldn't have gotten along personality wise, but brilliant. Everybody is working from similar myths, and
you muted again.
He and Simon create the romance. Everything Jack Kirby touched, he turned to gold. Did he get fairly compensated? Probably not in the long haul, but he was doing pretty well in the 60s and 70s. I mean, he was making a lot of money. Did he make a lot of money compared to Martin Goodman or eventually to Stan Lee? No, but it was a different role. Like Stan Lee, by 71, Stan Lee's not dealing with comic books anymore. From when Kirby basically leaves, Stan Lee's already got his eye on Hollywood, and he's just angling to create a studio in LA. That's what he spent most of the 70s doing. He was in senior management at Marvel. He wasn't the editor any longer. So things had changed. He had been in the business, as you know, since the late 30s. So he had already moved on. I don't buy that. What did Lee do once Kirby left? I'm not going to say it because I don't believe it, but like there are people who have argued that the quality of Kirby's work had fallen off by then, by the early 70s, certainly by the time he's at DC. I haven't dug into that enough to say it, and I wouldn't say it because the guys, they do whatever he wants. But I've heard that argument, just to throw it out there.
And by the way, one of the things I want to throw in here, what did Lee do after Kirby left to go to the war? He went to the war. He was a corpsman, right?
Well, we were talking. Glenn's talking about after 70, after 70s.
Lee didn't go overseas.
Well, he didn't have a choice. So that's
you don't get to pick where you go.
Yeah, no, you can't hold that.
Well, nobody would go, would they? That isn't what I'm saying.
Right. Exactly. Well, Jack wouldn't have went, right? Like he didn't want to go.
No,
he didn't.
Nobody does.
I think, Glenn, maybe you can tell me more if I don't get this, but I think Jack Kirby would have avoided the war if he could have totally. Like, I don't believe he was a person who wanted to fight. I think
nobody does. Nobody would want to go there.
There are some people that are pretty gung-ho, like they're raring to go into, but I don't sense that.
Not as many as who wouldn't. You're muted, Bob.
Okay, I got it.
Okay.
My microphone is sensitive. I've got to keep my hands free.
Where were we at? I've lost track of where the conversation landed is here.
No, it's fine. We're just talking about wartime, but yeah, I mean, it does get fuzzy, and it gets really fuzzy because the more popular Marvel becomes, the more money that's coming in. If Spider-Man would have been a failure, we wouldn't be talking about it ever. Nobody would, somebody would have written an article for an academic journal or something. But the more popular it becomes, the more people want a piece of it, So things change. Things change when there's money involved. That's always the case.
I think if you look at the 10 or so issues after Kirby left the Fantastic Four, when John Romita and John Buscema were drawing it, the stories aren't as good. That's just my opinion.
I'm just wondering if
They're
was it really Spider-Man that kicked off the? I know looking back, it seems like Spider-Man kicked off Marvel, but if you look at that first issue of Spider-Man, after Amazing Fantasy 15, where they introduced the character on the cover, who's selling Spider-Man on the cover of Spider-Man #1? Spider-Man himself isn't.
It's Fantastic Four
#1.
Yeah, it's Fantastic Four what launched Marvel. That was what did it.
Yeah. And what was that? Look at the Fantastic Four. That was the Challenges of the Unknown adapted, wasn't it? And Stan Lee didn't write that. Jack Kirby did.
I don't know. I've read that. I don't know Challengers.
Well, you should look. You should know. You're writing a biography about Stan Lee, but you don't know about Challengers. You should know.
No. I do know about Challengers. I just don't agree with you. That's right. I don't agree that I don't see that direct correlation from Challengers of the Unknown to Fantastic Four. I see elements, but I also see elements throughout popular culture. So, that's I know of the argument. Just
I've heard the story that Stan was
the
doing
correlation.
Challengers and that Marvel invited him to come back over and do Challengers for Marvel with a superhero twist. But
there you go.
I've also seen that seen the arguments that Fantastic Four was a direct analog to the Justice League. They wanted their own Justice League at Marvel. They didn't have a superhero team at the time, and that seemed to be a kind of thing.
Well, that's the infamous golf session, isn't it? Where nobody has any proof of that. Where allegedly somebody said Stan Lee was talking to the head of DC at the time, and what are you doing? We're doing Justice League. It's taking off, and he ran back to the office and said, "Let's do a group book." But nobody has any proof.
Goodman. That was Martin Goodman.
Yeah, nobody has any proof that actually happened.
Yeah. I mean the strange thing in all these stories is that we don't know the relationship between Martin Goodman, the business person, and Stan Lee, the managing editor. So there are a lot of dead ends in how things play out. We know more about the creative relationship between Stan and Jack and how that changed. But that's one of the reasons I wanted to write the Stan Lee biography. That's why the first book was called The Man Behind Marvel, because he was responsible for every decision that was happening on a business, from the business side. And the average reader who looks up on the screen in a Marvel movie and loves seeing a Stan Lee cameo has no idea about any of that history. And so much of it ends with Martin Goodman. Now that's, I don't think you could write that. I mean, there's been some attempts, but there isn't enough of a paper trail to really know what was going on, how those decisions were being made. I mean, even the things about Jack Kirby's contract and whether or not they gave him a fair salary. I've read that Kirby turned down being the art director at Marvel and how that would have played out. So we can't get into those questions with any authority because the paper trail doesn't exist as far as I know.
Yeah, well, there won't be a paper trail because it's like life, isn't it? They're just getting on with their lives. They're not thinking.
We weren't emailing people then,
and they're not thinking of 50 years ahead and all that kind of thing. Yeah, there is a lot lost there, but we'll never know. Well, no, we do know because it didn't happen. It didn't happen. But if Jack Kirby would have taken Stan Lee up on and been the art editor and told 10 other guys what to draw, we probably wouldn't have had Silver Surfer and Galactus and those things. And that would have been a shame. And that would have been nobody's fault, but that would have been a shame, wouldn't it? And Jack Kirby told me he didn't want to tell other people how to draw and what to do. He wanted to do it. So that's why he didn't. That's why he turned that down. If he had taken it, he probably could have had a bigger piece of the pie at the end of it all.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But he did. But he didn't.
Yeah.
But he didn't, because he was creative and he didn't want to tell you what to do. He wanted to do it himself. So, you know, I can see that.
Now, Glenn, you just said that that Jack told you, which I want to be able to make sure we plug your book here. I wanted to link to your book, but I couldn't find where it was being sold once the Indiegogo was
There
done.
isn't
So
one.
I don't have a link.
You got to get it off me. I'm looking at publishing it elsewhere, but you've got to get it off me at the moment, and you get a DVD with it of me talking to him in his studio.
Now, can you just give us the elevator pitch here, exactly how this book came to be? Because this was an interesting story. We've had you on the show for an hour. Give us a couple minutes.
Basically, I was a big Jack Kirby fan when I was a kid, and then I left. But I grew. Let's say I grew up. I was 17, 18. I went to college and all this kind of thing. Got a job in graphics and all that kind of thing. And then in the early 80s, when the black and white comics, indie comics suddenly appeared, I'd drawn strips all the time, not published, but drawn strips, and that's what I did in graphics. I was illustrator and things like that, photographer and all that kind of thing. And I just suddenly was aware of these comics, and I saw these Jack Kirby comics, and I still had them in my archive, so to speak, blah, blah, blah. And I just wondered if he was still alive. And I found out that he was alive. And then a few years later, was it 1987, I think it was, I went on a holiday, met some Americans who lived in California, spoke to them, and I was really getting back into Jack Kirby, and they lived in California, in Anaheim, near LA. And I just happened to mention to this guy, Bob, did he live near a place called Thousand Oaks? Because I'd seen that in the Kirby comics as an address, a PO box in Thousand Oaks, and it stuck in my mind. And he said, yeah, it was just it's an hour away. So anyway, so we arranged to go to America the next year and see these people who, we became friends. And they sent me Jack Kirby's phone number, right? And I thought it was a joke. And this is in the days of pre cell phones and all this kind of thing. And an overseas call was very expensive. And I used to come home from work and look at this letter, and there was Jack Kirby's number. And my partner at the time said, look, after 3 weeks, she said, just ring it. And if it's not him, just put the phone down. So I rang it, and it was him. Roz answered the phone, put Jack on, and I was talking to Jack Kirby. And I said, I'm coming over next year. Could I come and see you? And he said, yeah, and all this kind of thing. So we went out there, and Bob took us up to see them, and we had lunch and stayed there for about 6 hours the first time, and was in the studio and around the pool and all this kind of thing. It's all in the book. It's all on the DVD. And then a few years later, I went back and saw him again, but for not as long. But yeah, it was just an amazing thing the way it came about. It's one of those things, isn't it, where if I hadn't have gone to Barbados, I wouldn't have met Bob and Suzanne, and they wouldn't have taken me to Jack Kirby. It's one of those. Maybe I'd have got there some other way, but
I think it was the second visit when because there was that whole contentious return of the original artwork story.
Yeah,
and you were there when the artwork was being returned. They were opening up the envelope.
It was the first time I went. Roz took me on the arm and said, come and look at this, and she took me into this other room next door to Jack's studio, and there were these big piles of envelopes, a big pile of envelopes, brown envelopes on the floor. And she said, that's artwork we just got back, like 2 days ago from Marvel and DC. Open some. And I thought, wow. So I'm open, and Jack Kirby has not seen this artwork. I pulled out Kid Colt. He's not seen that since about 1961. And I've got it in my hands, and I've got pages from the New Gods in my hands, and Fantastic Four and Captain America that he's not seen since he sent them in, whenever it was he sent them in, and I'm holding them in my hands. It was incredible.
So Bob, did you how did you get to meet Stan Lee after the book? I mean, this is the 2000s. You can't call somebody up like that anymore out of the blue and not get charged with being a stalker or something.
No, I had some connections to him, and by the time I met him, he was 93, and
wow.
He was still at 93. He was a different person than he was at 95. Like once Joan died, he went pretty quickly downhill. Yeah. But at 93, I'm going to tell you, at the end of the interview, he shook my hand, and he had as powerful of a handshake as you would imagine that as somebody 30 years younger.
Yeah.
So I had some connections, and I met him at the end of a Comic-Con, and we had some time to chat, and it was a great experience. But I wasn't really asking anything of him. And I had already, he donated his archive to the University of Wyoming American Heritage Center. And I had just come back from spending 10 days at that archive. So I had spent probably 120 hours digging through his everything that he has at the archive, listening to old tapes. So it was pretty steeped in what was going on. And so I wasn't trying to probe him for a lot of answers to things. Plus, he's 93 at the time, and he is, he's told the stories so many times that the stories have become stories of stories.
Yeah.
And so I wanted it to be archivally based as much as possible. And I went to at least 3 archives. I had combed thousands and thousands of pages of newspaper and periodical sources, because at my heart, I'm an academic historian. I just don't want anybody to know it. So I try to write the books as if they're professionally historically researched, but not written like an academic tome. And so that's my perspective. I just wanted to talk to him. I questioned some things around the edges, but by that point in his career, there was nothing new or revelatory that he was going to tell me.
Yeah. Well, I was the same when I went to see him. I decided I was not going to stand there or sit there with him and ask questions. I would just let him talk. And he did like to talk, and he told his stories, and I just listened. I asked him the odd thing, but I didn't get into the Stan Lee Marvel thing. I didn't get into any of that because he'd been ill. And do you know what, Bob? I have to say, it wasn't my business. So I decided I wasn't going to go anywhere near any of that because it wasn't my business. And I know he'd been ill. And also what helped me not say anything, even if I wasn't going to, was Ros Kirby pulling me back and saying, don't mention anything about that. I wasn't, and I said to her, well, I wasn't going to do anyway. And I really wasn't going to do, because like I said, I figured it wasn't my business. And to be fair, I would only get his side, because I'm like you, Bob. Yeah. I've looked into other things. I've been looking at JFK assassination years ago and all that kind of thing. And you have to go in with it with an open mind, and that's what I did. And I just wanted to. I wasn't looking for any kind of revelation like you, or any nugget that you could say, oh, I know this and this. I didn't want that, because that's the scenery of it. And both men would have fogged memories by now. I just wanted to talk to him. And he told me about his war things, stories, getting shot at and all this kind of stuff. And it's just an interesting talk. It's funny and it's interesting.
Yeah,
like
I agree.
I didn't get into any of that.
I have some relationships with older men from that era, and I had, most of them are not famous like Stan Lee or Jack Kirby, and I feel the same way. I want to soak up their knowledge and hear the stories and hear how they talk about their lives. And this conversation, Glenn, with you, I've been a fan of what you've been doing. We're in the same Facebook groups, we're in the same circles, and I wish more people wouldn't come to the discussion with preconceived notions, because like when my first book came out, I got savaged on social media by people who were saying things that they clearly had not even opened my book and never were. And so I think that we can have an interesting, we don't have to be so polarized. And so I don't even participate in the conversations anymore. If somebody brings Stan Lee up, even if they say something outrageous, or Jack Kirby that I know is factually inaccurate, you're not going to change their minds. It's like if you like Trump or you don't like Trump, you're not going to change the person's mind. Yeah. It's almost, but it's interesting, isn't it, though? There's no other two people in comics that bring up this kind of,
That's right.
hubbub. Like J.M. DeMatteis, like nobody's like, everybody just loves him. Like you either like his work or you don't. Like no, but nobody's like arguing about what he's doing, and like even Neil Gaiman, like people aren't arguing about this stuff. Like you either like it or you don't. But Stan and Jack have that magic. That's what we should be celebrating, that magic, and digging around the edges as much as we can.
I've said this before, and I'll say it for the record here. I think Stan Lee is brilliant. I really mean that. I think he was a great frontman, great salesman, and he pushed it. A great editor. His words were brilliant. I love his words. I know they're a bit corny sometimes, but that's a bit of fun. But I just don't think he wrote the stories. But that's the thing. But I've never said that Stan Lee was rubbish. I've never said he was anything less than brilliant, because he was. And like we say, I think Jack Kirby would have got somewhere with his art, but it wouldn't have been that. It wouldn't have been. I think Stan Lee probably reined him in a little, because when he goes to DC and does New Gods, and he's got free reign, the stories are all over the place. He clearly needs an editor, and that's what I think Stan Lee's genius was that he could not control him. That sounds too conniving, but you understand what I mean. He would shape. He would guide him and say, no, do this, do that, because he had an overview. But I would never say that Stan Lee was an idiot or anything like that. He wasn't. He was brilliant.
Even Jack, during their contentious phases, when Jack had gone to DC, begrudgingly had to admit that Stan Lee was an excellent salesperson. But he did so through the character of Funky Flashman, which he introduced into the.
I think he was being a bit cheeky there, wasn't he? And Roy Thomas and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, but that's what artists do, don't they? They put things in their work, But like I say, I would never say that Stan Lee was anything less than brilliant.
Glenn, do you think there is there a hidden archive out there somewhere? Is there a garage or a storage unit that has Jack's stuff that we don't know about? Like, do you feel there's something out there still to be found?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
That would be great.
I have an opinion on it, but I'm not going to express that opinion because I don't know.
Okay.
But I feel there is, and I feel
there's a treasure trove, and you think you know where it's at.
Yes. But let me just say, I've got no idea. It's just a thought. I don't have it. I'm not teasing you. I'm not saying I've got any inside information, because I don't have, but I just have a feeling that there is and where it might be. But I'm probably totally wrong. Just my opinion.
The fact that it still might even survive today. I mean, first of all, I'm surprised that his artwork was still surviving when you were there seeing it opened up. I know this was in the 80s, I would have to guess, late 80s.
1988,
Because I remember the Eclipse comics. Eclipse was getting, as you say, cheeky with their ads. You'd buy an Eclipse comic, and the back cover ad was it was Marvel's 50th birthday, 30th birthday. I don't know. It was a birthday, or like, happy birthday, Marvel. There was a big picture of Jack smoking a cigar, and they're like, what about Jack? And it was
that
all
would have been what, 50 year.
I'll tell you something that I didn't like. A couple of years ago, just pre-COVID, just a few years ago, there's in Manchester where I live, my city. I live outside the city, but that's the city. There's an art gallery, and we go to this art. Me and my wife go to this art gallery a lot because we like artwork. And then when we went in this particular Saturday, there were these giant prints as big as like a door of all these Marvel covers, and there was Captain America. There was that Hulk where he's holding up the crumbly logo, by Jim Steranko. The cover was a Captain America by Kirby and Sid Shores. I think it was number 101. There was a John Buscema Namor where he's standing there, the Submariner where he's standing there, that full page, and as big as a door. Wow! And they all had Stan Lee written on the side. And I said to the guy, whose artwork is this? And he said, oh, it's Stan Lee. He's done all these. And I said, No, he's not.
Oh boy, that was a
And
curator who did not know what he was showing.
Yes, and even the that Hulk where he's holding the logo, and it says Steranko down the side. It didn't say Steranko, that was gone. It said Stanley.
Oh my gosh!
Now that's a problem with me.
Yeah,
because that guy in there thought that Stanley was the best artist that ever lived, and Stanley didn't know what a pencil was.
Yeah, I've done the same thing. If it's somebody in that realm that should know better, I'll speak up. But I'm not going to get into a fight on Twitter or Facebook.
No, I'm not. I forget that.
But if I see something where somebody should know the difference, I speak up right away.
Yes, but the person who put the name Stan Lee on should know as well. It shouldn't be left up to the curator to say it's wrong. And I think it's done on purpose, but that's just me.
Well, they should have hired you or I to curate. Yes. They should have called you or I in to curate that exhibit. Then they'd get the truth.
Yeah,
that's like going to the museum and seeing Michelangelo's artwork and a signature by Pope whatever. Because
it should say Stan Lee.
Oh, yes.
It's a joke. yes, it's wrong. It's credit where it's due, and that's what the big problem is. So, I'm not saying Stan Lee wasn't influential in all that was going on, but well.
So here's where my history is going to go right, because you hear Stan Lee and Jack Kirby together, and it's like, yeah, this was the birth. This was the big bang for comics, so to speak. When it really took off and a generation was influenced. But how long did they really work together? Because I feel like now that it wasn't really that long.
No, it'd be less than 10 years, wouldn't it? Fantastic Four was 61 and Jack had left in 70. Because I don't think that Stan Lee had any input on anything Jack Kirby was doing in the 40s, other than working there. He wasn't guiding him then. So it would probably be about 9 years, wouldn't it? 10 years.
Stan called Jack in after Joe Manley died.
Was that 56?
And so it was. I don't remember the exact year. So somebody could just look up Joe Manley and see when he passed away, and he calls Jack back. And Jack was having that whole comic strip problem with DC. And DC had blackballed him. So Jack had nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And Joe Manley dies, and Stan and Jack suddenly need each other really badly. Yeah. And so I think that's the mid to late 50s. Yeah. So that's the start. That's kind of the rebirth period.
You're right, because they were doing monster books first, weren't they?
Yeah.
And cowboys, westerns.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So we're talking sort of 59, 60, aren't we?
Yeah.
And then the FF was November 61.
Mm-hmm.
So what would that be? 10, 11, 12 years?
Yeah.
Certainly no more than that.
It's actually longer than I thought it was, because I was almost getting the feeling like they had birthed some comics, and then they got angry, and then they didn't really work together that much. But 10 years, that's a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
And it's
I think
it makes you kind of wonder, what more they could have accomplished had they been able to work out these differences.
Well, never was going to happen, was it? So we don't know. But it would have been.
Yeah, I mean, it's a what if. It's a what if comic.
But it's like with Lennon and McCartney, isn't it? They were better together, weren't they? But they both did some decent stuff later, but not as much. But then again, you could argue that they were older and more settled and not as angry and whatever, bit more money, all those kind of things that we get, because we all want to change the world when we're 19, don't we?
Absolutely.
I was trying to look for the date. It's like 57 ish.
Yeah.
I was Googling it. I couldn't find anything. I found a different Joe Manley in comics who died in 2003, and I'm sure that wasn't him.
No.
Mm-mm. Nope. But it's it's interesting. Yeah.
Can I just
Jack's
say,
doing amazing work in the late 50s. So it's it's cool stuff.
Can I just say to everybody here that it's nearly 8 o'clock where I am, so I'm drinking red wine, so it's not like lunchtime like these guys. So
Cheers. The last time RJ and I spoke, I was drinking bourbon. which is my nightly treat.
Typical.
And by the end of the episode, if you watch the whole episode through, I'm a little tipsy by the end. So, but I'm stone sober right now, so we're good.
Yeah, we started this, and I'm like, I don't have my Bud Light with me, and I'm like, because it's 12 o'clock, I don't need it right now.
Exactly.
I'm not used to doing shows at this time.
Glenn, you should drop me an email, because I know I have some connections with some publishers that may be interested. So,
yeah, sure, yeah, that'd be brilliant, yeah.
And since with your work, I don't need to write a Jack Kirby biography now, because I actually thought about it. I was like, because I have the connections to get a trade publisher, and I could get that book published. So I was just going to be like, F all these people who want to say that I hate Jack Kirby. I'll show them all just by writing a Jack Kirby biography, because I love him.
You should write that book, because this isn't a biography. This is the story of me going to him. That's why it's called Jack Kirby, A Personal Journey.
Yeah,
it's my journey to see him. So it's not a biography. There's a lot in it, but it's not a biography. I wouldn't say it was a biography. So please write that book.
Yeah, I don't think what's his name who used to work for him, I mean, he does great work, but he wrote that one biography. There's supposed to be an update. I don't think we're ever going to see that. They've been talking about that it's been talked about for 20 years. I don't know if it's going to happen.
I don't know.
Get in and do it.
I don't know him well enough.
I think you should do it.
Yeah, I got too many books lined up between. I think I'm going to die before I get all the books done that I want to finish.
I've got a few. I'm writing about 10 at the same time now. So a couple of science fiction stories, and my trips to New York, and all sorts of stuff going on.
Well, that's great. That's great.
Bob, how long did it take to from idea to finished product? How long does it take to do a biography like the one for Stan Lee?
So here's the thing. It depends on how much you know going in. Like, I'm the kind of writer that I start writing. If I sign a book deal, I start writing the book that day, because you can get the sources, and with the ease of word processing, you can categorize everything and write it into the story and then rewrite chapters. So I like to get in and write, because it gets me thinking about. Usually the usual book deal you have is about a year, but if you've done a ton of research before you get the book deal, then that year really becomes about, putting words on the screen. And it depends on the length. You'd think, like, most people don't realize about book publishing, you have no control really over the word count. The publisher, unless you're really famous, the publisher is going to tell you this has to be, like, in my case, the Stan Lee book could be 90,000 words and no more than 95, or we'd have to start making major revisions. So how do you cover somebody like Stan Lee in 90,000 words? And some other people might be like 65,000 words, which is about the average first novel. Yeah. So it's usually about a year, and I can write a book in less than a year if I know a lot about the thing beforehand. Yeah. But if it's fresh research, that's the part where you want to be knowledgeable, and that's, little takes a little more time.
Yeah, it depends. It's all the research, isn't it, and everything, because you've got to go into it with. When I write my books, my factual books, I have to go in with an open mind and try and get rid of what you think you know. I did that with the Kennedy thing. You've got to, and you've got to look at. I find that you can't think, "Oh, well, I'm not reading that. That seems like a load of rubbish." You've got to read it and prove to yourself that it either is or it isn't, as part of your research. You've got to read everything else as part of your research. I think you can't go in with a closed mind and a determined end, because that's just silly, because you'll miss something along the way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And now with newspapers.com, you have access to so much more information. So it's, it's great on one hand, but it makes it more difficult on the other hand. So reading everything might include, imagine reading 3,000 or 4,000 newspaper articles. Yeah. Like that's daunting. that could take
I did when I started my research on JFK, I was 18. And this is 1973. and I was, and a couple of years later, I didn't think I'd stay that long, but it was just so fascinating thing, such a lot of information. I used to go into the Central Library, which is one of the biggest in Europe, and I used to spend days there looking through all the newspapers, reading the books, reading the Warren Report. I think I must be one of only about 5 people in the world who've read the entire Warren Commission report and its 26 volumes of evidence. Wow. And it's just fascinating. And even if you don't do anything with it, but when I was researching, I went to Dallas when the House Select Committee were doing the reenactment in 1978. But I was interviewed on the radio and all that kind of thing. And people think I'm an expert, like they do. They think I'm an expert on Jack Kirby, and I'm not. I'm not at all. But you, like you're saying, Bob, if you're going to do it justice and do yourself justice as well, you've got to do the research. The writing is almost, like I said before, the scenery of it. That's the aftermath of it. The writing, that's just getting down what you found out. And I've never been under the situation that you had, where you've had to add a finite amount of words. I've always just written what I thought and did that way. But I find the investigation into it, the research, the fascinating part. The actual writing it is the easy bit, really. Not that it's easy, but it's easier.
No. Yeah, for me, I'm trying to be a little more lyrical and scenic and things. So the writing is a little bit different. But RJ, you said we had a question. I'd love to answer questions
we did. This one's they want to know if Jack was a freelancer, and I know that a lot of artists are freelancers these days, but I don't know what the situation was.
He was, yeah. He was, yeah.
So, but he was like freelancer with a contract, because you had to almost be exclusive to a comic company. You couldn't just write for all of them or draw for all of them.
He let's put it this way, as I understand it, he wasn't on staff. Let's put it that way. But I think he was contracted to Marvel, wasn't he? He did have a contract, but he wasn't on staff. Is that right? That's the way I would put it. So he wasn't free to draw for everybody and his dog, because he had a contract.
Okay. And because there were situations where people, as you said way earlier, did moonlight for the other company. And
he did, didn't he? They all did.
Yeah. And Martin Goodman wouldn't hire people. Like, it was a bare bones. There were times when Marvel was essentially Stan, a admin, and a couple production people,
and a pile of artwork.
That's it. Yeah. And I mean, so like we mentioned earlier, so much of this goes back to Martin Goodman and how he had set up his company. I said once in the book, Martin Goodman's only objective was to move mountains of paper each month. And that's what he did. He had a line of like these kind of suggestive men's magazines. He had comic books. He had true crime books back in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. He didn't care anything about quality. He cared a little bit about the covers. The rest was just, how much money can I make publishing, tens of thousands of pages.
Is this story true? I heard that Martin Goodman went into Stan Lee's office one day, and there's a big pile of artwork, and he said, "What's all this?" And it was Stan was giving people work. And he said, "What's all this Kirby stuff or something?" And he said, "Oh, he does 50 pages a day." And but the genius of Martin Goodman, the businessman, didn't say, "Don't give him any work." He said, "Give him a lesser page rate." Is that true? Did you find anything about that? Or is it just one of these rumors?
I don't know about that.
Right, but you see,
there were times when Martin, that stockpile, Stan would stockpile stories.
Yeah.
And when Goodman found out, he basically shut the company down and said, like, we've got 6 months or 8 months worth of, it was also, I think, one of the things that I explore in the book that readers have told me they enjoy is that I'm bringing in what's happening in the broader society at the same time. So it's hard to talk about Jack and Stan if you don't know about the comic book scare in the early 50s.
Yeah.
It's hard to, so there are things happening, like the television and the Batman TV show has a huge impact on Marvel. And all these things are kind of happening in parallel universes. And so many people focus on what they think are facts about X, Y, or Z without thinking about the broader, what's going on in culture.
And that's the fascination, and not to dwell on it, but to go back to the JFK thing. I'd go to the library on a Saturday, and I'd be in Dealey Plaza in Dallas, via Washington and Vietnam and Brazil, because of where those characters, those people were operating and all that kind of thing. I'd be in the Soviet Union for 3 weeks, in Minsk, where Oswald was. And it's that same kind of thing, because that's the research. That's the fascinating part.
Full immersion.
Yeah. If you're going to do it, do it. Do it right. And like I said, enter with an open mind and find out. And you'll be surprised what you come out with at the end. You'll be different.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to tell everybody that, if you want to read Bob's book on Stan Lee, the link is below in the video. We'll take you right to Amazon where you can pick it up. And that's the one. There are a couple, so pick them all.
If you're an adult reader, this is the one. If you have a high school student that you want to get into Stan Lee, pick up the green cover version of this. It's got some cool photos and illustrations and things. That's the main difference.
Yeah, the young adult version of it. And as I said, I would have linked to Glenn's, but Glenn's isn't publicly available yet. You've got to get it directly from him now that the Indiegogo is over. Hopefully you'll get hooked up with a publisher on that real soon here, because I think that's worthy of getting out there, especially as a book and DVD, because you had somebody holding the home video camera the whole time while Jack was talking, and that's been transferred. That should be like pasted, a sleeve pasted right inside the hardcover with the disc. That's
right. Yeah, that's right. That's what I want to see. I want to see it on sale in America, because the postage.
That would be cool. Yeah, that's gonna pose a bit of I know a lot about publishing distribution. I mean, there's some wrinkles there, but it shouldn't be insurmountable.
I think we should put it out, Jack Kirby and Stan Lee book together, Bob.
Oh yes, make that happen. A book about a biography about the relationship of the two men. That would be fantastic.
At one point, people were like, they were slagging me so hard about Stan Lee, while other people were saying, finally, we've got a good Stan Lee biography, that for a while, I shied away from Stan Lee. I had to get away from it, because the negativity, like I try to be a compassionate, empathetic person in my life, and I just couldn't deal with the negativity. So, I went, my publisher they were begging me, like, let's do more of this. There's more stuff that people can learn. And finally, during the pandemic, I'm like, well, if we're all going to eventually die, I might as well get this out, because I have more to say. Yeah. And I'm happy that I did. The negativity has been less because I don't engage in it. I just stay away from it. So, but the positives have been great. The people who've read it are happy, and that's all I care about as a writer. I want readers, and I want to hear what they have to say.
Yeah, of course.
Justin is theorizing here that Jack's style was too well known to be able to successfully get away with aliases and moonlighting. Jack worked under aliases long before, and in fact, his style really depends on who inks him. There's a 1976 Captain America Bicentennial edition, fully penciled by Jack Kirby, but
Barry
they doled
Smith's
the pages out to different inkers.
Yeah.
It looks different depending on who inks him every single time.
But you can tell it's Jack.
Oh yeah. But I mean, you could get away with somebody at DC embellishing it a little bit differently, and like, is that Jack's work? That's somebody copying me. It's very similar to my style.
I think the thing is, RJ, is that I don't think the powers, so to speak, were looking at things that closely. They wouldn't. They would just know that book sold well. They wouldn't care who was producing it. And I think that's part of the reason he could get away with it.
And the interesting thing is that these are the two figureheads. So if you came into Marvel, to pass the Marvel drawing test, you had to produce something that looked like Jack, or they would send people to Jack for him to train them. And the same thing for writing. They give you a Jack page, and you'd have to dialogue it if you wanted to write at Marvel. And so these two are, they're up here at the top, and that's one of the points that I make in the book is that, in Stan's case, the dialogue, the voice of the characters, this becomes so ingrained in American popular culture because we all experience it. And now that pattern, Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man sounds like Stan Lee. And we hear that automatically.
Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with that because it's good. It's good. So, there's nothing, no way around it.
And if you believe the arguments that, basically Darth Vader is a ripoff of Kirby's stuff, like that's just amazing to me. It's an amazing, Jack's influence is being felt in popular culture today, no doubt, whether people realize it or not. Mm-hmm. So it's amazing, two amazing men. There's nobody else that we put in these categories.
Comics would not be the same today without both of them.
No.
No. Well, gentlemen, this has been a productive and wonderful hour of discussing some of the giants in our comic book industry, and I appreciate both of you taking the time to come together and make it happen. Boy, I really do kind of hope that you guys get together and do this this Stan and Jack story. Bob's like, oh God, another one on my line now. But
yeah, I don't know what else I would say.
I think Bob's probably got a better chance than I do because I only know about my visit. I don't know much about it otherwise. I'm not an expert of anything really, other than what I do.
I'll be scratching my head though, Glenn. I could write a Jack Kirby biography fairly quickly, I believe, and it would. So I'll think about it. The problem is I've the next 3 years lined up with books, so maybe.
Well, you could hire me as your consultant.
Okay.
I'll tell you what, I'll write it under your name and you can get it published. You're an own author, so I'll write it under your name.
Awesome.
You're
gonna have to do that.
You're gonna go hire it out as a ghostwriter. There's a comic book writer who does that, and I can't remember his name, and I probably shouldn't say it anyway. But maybe I shouldn't. I've ghostwritten plenty of books. Let me just say, I don't talk about it, but I've written. We've all done it. It's you're a freelance writer at times. You got to do what you got to do.
Yep.
All right. Well, everybody in the chat is giving us comments about how they've enjoyed the chat here.
I'm glad you're here. I have too. Thank you, Glenn.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you both. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I enjoyed it. We didn't get anywhere, but we got.
This has been a lot of fun, and I'm glad we got to do it. Yeah. So, thank you both for making the time for it. Everybody in the chat.
Thank you, RJ. Critical Blast is my favorite video podcast in the planet. So people should listen up and watch.
That. Everybody in the chat, we're so glad you were here. We don't have a show without you. We're just a podcast falling in the woods. And as always, while you were here, we just hope you had a blast. Good afternoon.